Next up, we have Apple is now highlighting podcasts.
No.
Yeah, we need a segue.
I need a better segue.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You got to think of something.
Okay. Wait, I got it. Okay. I don't actually have anything. I'm going to do it on the fly. Speaking of loot boxes, Apple is looting the podcasters that make podcasts on Apple Podcasts for 30% with this new subscription feature of their money.
Oh.
Yeah?
Bars.
Okay.
The flow there was impeccable.
I haven't thought of anything prior. Okay.
Check it out. Discord loot boxes. Boxes. Apple boxes. Apple.
So, speaking of Apple,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
okay,
So,
we got there.
yeah, I think in 2021, Apple launched this new podcast subscriptions feature, which is effectively supposed to be Patreon for Apple Podcasts. You can do multiple different things, like give exclusive episodes. You can give early access. It's basically exactly Patreon. However, Apple, got to take their cut because it's Apple. So if you sign up to be a podcast that uses the Apple Podcast subscription feature, they take 30% of your revenue for the first year and 15% for every subsequent year.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it's a lot, and you can probably see why people probably don't want to sign up for this because, like, I don't know, locking yourself into... There's a whole discussion around this, and, like, a big part of it is podcasts are one of the only things so far that have not necessarily been, like, locked down by a platform because they're
kind of
RSS.
surprising.
Well, because they're RSS based. They're like one of the
Yeah.
last remaining RSS based things that is just a feed. It's a fire hose that can be captured by any client.
Okay, hear me out. This is probably a terrible idea. Apple, don't do this. But
Oh,
you know how
get ready to bleep this.
we had SMS, which is just like the thing that carriers supported, and then Apple went, we want to build something that does more media and rich and bigger files, blah, blah. And they just made iMessage, and it just straight up didn't need SMS. You could use it over the internet. Apple Podcasts is so big and so dominant that if they just went, RSS is like whatever, but we want to do this rich ecosystem thing here where we have subscriptions and tiers and all this stuff, we're just going to build it separately and people will upload to our thing. They could do that, right?
Well, they're not actually dominant. Spotify is the most popular podcast player in the world.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, Spotify has most of the...
Is
But
that
the same
relatively
thing
new?
applies to them.
That
Spotify
does.
could do that.
Yeah, I guess it would be, you would need some sort of dominance already to
Right.
pull that off.
And they had the dominance with iTunes, but when Spotify started doing podcasts, somehow it was so successful, they were able to transition so many of their music listeners over to being podcast listeners,
Okay, that's good then.
which is pretty crazy.
All right.
Anyway, so they made this feature, and some people signed up, some people didn't. But just recently, there was this report out of Semaphore that now in the browse section of Apple Podcasts, they noticed that 5 of the 7 of the recommended podcasts were channels that had signed up for the subscription feature. And they found that to be a little bit like sketch. So
That doesn't shock me at all.
well,
Like how YouTube might highlight channels that use their new features. That wouldn't shock me at all.
yeah, but I feel like this is so the thing about podcasts, like I said, is like RSS is this big fire hose anyone can tap into, and Apple is sort of trying to get people to now focus on using Apple Podcasts because if you have Apple Podcast subscriptions and you're like pulling people towards Apple Podcasts as the only place to get the bonus episodes and the early episodes and that kind of stuff, that you're inherently not going to use any of your other options. And then it's like, oh, if I want to subscribe to this channel and get early access to episodes, I have to use an iPhone. This is the same thing as the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like you have to use an iPhone to be able to get your early podcast stuff, which is like not something Apple should be able to own.
That's why,
Yeah.
like, we've looked into this because we look at any podcast type of things for Waveform, obviously. And like when we originally saw this, we just release episodes when they're out. Like we've been pitched a million times on a million platforms, like early release, have people pay for early release. And we're like, we release it as early as possible. Sometimes
I'm
maybe
trying.
too early. Yeah.
We're
Like,
making as
that
much
is
as
not
we
something
can.
we can do. We are not that. But like when we looked at this, even though I know you said Spotify is the most popular in the world, for us, we have a huge US base. Apple Podcasts is the most popular way people listen to Waveform.
yeah.
It still doesn't make sense for us to do a bunch of stuff specifically that can only be tapped in through Apple Podcasts.
Right.
Even if we found this extra stuff that we wanted to release on it, it would alienate well, probably over a half of our viewers.
Right.
Yeah.
And when podcasts is like that with RSS feeds and people are listening on a million different things, this feels way less of like, hey, podcasters, come make some extra money, and more Apple being like, hey, start not thinking about other ways to listen to podcasts, which is really hard if you need to do it on an iPhone or a Mac, like the podcast app and something like that.
So you said this was in the browse area of the app. It's not like a chart or something.
No, it's in the like discover area of the app.
Because I would expect, charts to remain sort of untouched.
Yeah,
But
'cause
if it's
they're
whatever they
data-focused.
want, if it's Apple's Discover section,
Right.
like they can put editor's choice stuff, whatever they want there.
The way that you traditionally got your podcast in the like discover section or the editor's choice section of Apple Podcasts was you would fill out a form, say this is my podcast, this is what it's about, and then someone at Apple would like listen to it and decide whether it was good enough to throw up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was kind of like it's like a lottery in
It's
that
already
way.
a slippery. Yeah. That's just whatever Apple likes.
It does feel a little weirder being like people using YouTube's new features are not based on the user paying, right? Like YouTube isn't going to put something forward because the users are paying for something towards that channel. Whereas this is like, hey, you're going to get pushed forward because you're getting your users to pay you money.
But also
and we're
YouTube
getting
is
a
like
cut.
the platform where you upload the video. And so I feel like because podcasts are RSS focused, trying to consolidate power towards one
Oh yeah, that's
distribution platform just feels bad.
no, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this quote from the Semaphore article that says, an executive at an independent podcast told Semaphore that in recent months, when they asked the company how they could be promoted in the browse carousel, Apple leaders suggested that the show participate in the platform's new subscription program. Buy your mom an iPhone. It's like that last part was not in the quote, but it's very similar. Like, just you want to be featured.
Yeah.
Use our 30% tax.
I totally see both sides of it. Like if I'm YouTube again, if I'm like, hey YouTube, how do I get more promoted on like homepage and recommended? Well, if you use the subscription features and you use the playlist features and use all these other features, then you'll have more chances to be shown and highlighted. Obviously, it's how we encourage people to use the features more. So that doesn't shock me. But when Apple does it, and it's like sort of siphoning from RSS-based podcasts in general, then it feels a little different. It doesn't shock me that they're doing this.
Yeah,
but
me neither.
Yeah.
it is interesting.
It is just weird because the value proposition from YouTube is upload it and you'll get paid, basically. Like if you get to a certain point, we'll put ads in your thing, we'll handle it all, you're good. And then you're using their features on top of that. But for podcasts are already free. Like there's no value inherent in uploading to Apple specifically. And then
Only-
they're taking 30%.
Well,
I think
they're
Apple
it's
would
of the-
argue
of the like
subscription.
premium subscription
Yeah.
revenue. Yeah.
so they're having you create value proposition by more content that people would pay for or something like that, and they're taking that cut.
They're giving you a platform to make money off of additional content, and they're taking 30% of that additional revenue in the first year and 15% in each subsequent year.
I also think the word platform does a lot of lifting, where you assume that if you just made a podcast and put it on an RSS feed, then almost no one would find it. But if you put it on a platform that elevates it and has some discoverability in some way, then more people will find it. And if you put it on the biggest, most discoverable, vibrant platform like Apple's, you're more likely to get more eyeballs. So I think Apple would argue there is value to being on our insert platform here, App Store, whatever. Being on Apple Podcasts gets you more eyeballs, lets you charge more for ads, and now we'll take our cut. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's kind of their thing.
Yeah, but they need to do more. Like as someone that like we use Megaphone, which is a Spotify company. They make it very easy to do everything we need to do, like show notes and ads and all that.
And not
inventory.
fucking chapters. Megaphone, what are you doing? People have been complaining about it on this podcast for years. Just add chapters. I know you're listening. I know somebody right now at Megaphone or Spotify is listening. Give us chapters. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Agreed.
We get yelled at.
But I say that platform discussion versus what Apple will offer if you upload to Apple. There's just nothing we're getting out of just uploading straight to Apple outside of something that already exists somewhere else. Like I don't get anything specific to Apple
Just
when
eyeballs.
I upload just eyeballs.
Yeah.
Which is like, is that really worth it?
Eyeballs are pretty important.
If you get in the browse section, sure, but that's only like what 3 podcasts a day or something, you know?
Yeah.
So that's something that kind of bugs me a little bit with this is like, I hope we all agree, or we've talked about it a lot. One of the biggest issues with podcasts is discoverability. It's something we're consistently focusing on.
That's why we put it on this platform.
It's why YouTube is great for podcasts, I think.
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts has a chance to have a platform that can help discoverability and do better. And I'm sure they're doing some things, but still, no matter what, discoverability in podcasts sucks.
It does.
So then to be like, well, the thing that sucks, now our way of doing it is 5 of the 7 things we're going to suggest to you are because they're making us money and have this kind of weird subscription thing focused on it. That's where it feels a little ickier to me.
Hear me out. What if there was a platform where you could upload your podcast and it had discoverability built in, and they would cook in.
This was coming.
I did the minute he said "what if,"
When he said "hear me out," he's like, he's just gonna pitch YouTube.
And they would give you ads without you having to do extra work. But they take 55%. Would you do it?
Is it a podcast?
Yeah, you have a podcast. You have to put it online. They offer you the eyeballs and discoverability, and they will bake in ads for you so you don't have to sell them yourself, but they take 55%.
But I could just put it on an RSS feed and monetize it myself.
But what Marques is saying is that it's got really good discoverability features, because that's the worst part of distributing your podcast is getting people to know
because
about
everyone can't have a top 5 podcast, you know?
Yeah, so good that it goes out and finds an audience for your video and is able to learn who will watch it based on who it's successful with.
Is the host of this hypothetical podcast the most famous tech reviewer in the world? Or am I starting really from nothing?
And we're talking about audio podcasts, right?
We're talking about whatever format you want and whatever host you want.
Well, I think if you're going the route that 90% of podcasts go, where you have like an established media brand, this is not it. But if literally no one has ever heard of you before, and you don't feel like you have the ability to make a splash on the internet in any other way,
which is more often true.
yeah, but dude, you said 55%.
55%.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what YouTube
Forever.
takes.
YouTube?
That's what YouTube takes.
Yeah.
Of the ad revenue?
That's what we do currently, by the way. I just described exactly what we do.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know they took 55.
Yeah, wait.
Are we being ripped off?
The point I guess I'm illustrating is that the trade-off for eyeballs, because of how hard it is to find podcasts, is absolutely worth the difference in revenue and all the other tools built in.
Yeah, and what's I think kind of weird about and here's the other thing, which is just why we can't relate, is like for Apple Podcasts, maybe we do want to do something, or we are willing to like pay to get a little more eyeballs in the browse feature, but like the subscription thing is we just don't see ourselves as contributing to that. Like that feature itself for us doesn't make sense because we don't have time for extra content. The content we make is very specific and we just push it to everyone as much as we can. Like we've tried to do subscription things multiple times and we just find ourselves as like, we want everyone to see this instead, but now we don't get any benefit of being in that browse feature.
Yeah. There are a lot of creators that come up with interesting things to be extra
Release it
content.
a week early.
Or early releases and stuff like that. And for them, when they get this offer, they're like, okay, we should probably
for
do
sure
the Apple way.
There are 2 podcasts that I have paid subscriptions to that the only way you can listen to them. Like they don't put out any content for free. And clearly I'm cool with that.
I want to make sure, I think supporting podcasts or just content in general through subscription stuff like this, Patreon, whatever, is awesome. Like, I 100% think it should happen. We're lucky enough that we don't really need to do it, and we just like pushing stuff out. But there are plenty of people that you should support, and I do with multiple different channels. Like, that is great. I like this. I just think the browse feature having 5 of 7 of like doing that when, I don't know, that feels a little weird.
Yeah, it makes it so there's just a much higher incentive to move towards Apple's kind of podcast subscription feature. But then what you're doing is you're sort of locking yourself into one platform distribution.
Yeah. So
which
there's
just feels bad.
an inverse relationship between discoverability and loyalty to or diversity of platforms.
Right.
And
right.
we have something so precious with RSS feed, like all of the aspirations of the Activity Pub, which David has totally convinced me of, by the way. I'm like full send. Activity Pub is awesome.
What's your Threads handle? What are you on Mastodon?
I'm
Where's your Blue Sky?
no, that's not
Blue Sky's
Activity
not
Pub.
Activity
That's
Pub.
not Activity Pub.
That was a test.
And low key, I kind
protocol.
of am a fan of that now, but continue.
I like the app
God.
protocol too.
But yeah, it's just like we should not give in to these companies trying to damage this beautiful ecosystem that we're blessed
in
to
an
have.
extremely non-capitalistic world, I really think that RSS and just like these fire hoses of like publish once it goes everywhere, and whoever decides to build the capture platform, you are competing on the quality of your capture platform.
Yeah.
And that's why I think things like we have a lot of diversity in podcast players. Like Pocket Cast is awesome.
Shout out
A lot
to
of people
Pocket
like
Rip Google Podcast, though.
Oh yeah, that's dead.
yeah. All right, did we talk about that?
No, I just figured we were going to throw it in at the end, but
We were
Marques
gonna
found a
talk
good way to
segue.
talk about it.
We were going to talk about that briefly, but we could just loop it into this.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of really great podcast players, and so if the consolidation gets pushed more towards like platforms instead of competing just on the merits of how good the UX design is,
Yeah.
then that kind of sucks.
Can I, at the risk of sounding like a shill, play devil's advocate one more time?
Oh, you've been sounding like a shill already.
I'm fully in.
Fill me up, buddy.
But what if one of the features of these podcast platforms is discoverability? So like you have a great UI, that's one of the features. You have a great download interface and like speeding up, fast forwarding, cutting silence, all that stuff. They all do the basics. So one of the features to differentiate yourself as a podcast platform is a discover page that can find the podcasts that you're interested in and serve them to you. That'd be a really nice feature.
That technically is something they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things Apple highlights, and while they're at it, they figured they would also give you paywalled content and give you, subscription stuff or whatever. All that can be sort of mixed into what separates them as a podcast platform.
Yeah.
But it's all on top of RSS. A really simple syndication.
But that's the beauty of RSS is that like if people really felt like, oh, I'm not discovering enough podcasts, new podcasts, someone could make an app that is just a podcast discoverer, and it would be super
awesome.
easy because it just would have to plug into RSS.
Which is basically Activity Pub.
Kinda.
It's the same thing. You make a different platform that takes the same fire hose but has a bunch of other features that that's the merit that you're competing for your customers on. So you could make an app that's just, we are so focused on podcast discoverability, and that's our focus, and then that's why we want you to use the app.
It doesn't necessarily address Marques's devil's advocate point, but I just feel so strongly that all the answers are in RSS, both for creators and these platforms.
The biggest problem is they're not capitalistic enough.
Yeah, innovating on top of it is the challenge.
It would also be cool if somehow in that RSS, whatever, like if you did want to do subscription-based things, like being able to do it on all of your platforms, like why?
Right.
What if I do want to pay a podcast and get bonus content, but it's only available on Apple Podcasts? I don't listen on Apple Podcasts. Why should I have to move everything over there? Why can't I just like
And that's
do it
Apple's.
on something
That's
else?
what Apple wants.
Exactly,
because then
I get
you
it.
Move to Apple.
I get
Podcasts.
it.
You
Yeah.
want the bonus stuff.
Here's an example too. If there's a podcast, it's RSS, it's really simple. You just get the episodes, and you like it so much you want to donate, and only one of the podcast players has a donate button in it where you can donate directly to them. Logical answer is, I'll go to that podcast player, I'll donate through that button, and that podcast player, as a result of surfacing that, will probably take a cut of what they just allowed the donation to be.
Right.
So they give you the discoverability of the donation button, and that's a gift from the platform, and then they take a cut of what they're giving you because they're making it possible for that donation to happen.
I don't really care about the cut.
Interesting.
There's a cut in everything. Patreon has a cut, right? Everything has to have a cut. I don't really mind that much if they're offering that. I just think it's weird with RSS and people listening on a bunch of different things. Why does only one platform? And it's not Apple's fault that there aren't other ways of doing that.
And if you do it on an iPhone, there's another cut.
Guys, should we make a podcasting app?
I think we should make a phone. Wait, no. Never mind. Bad idea.
I don't know.
I think the moral of the story here is Megaphone add fucking chapters.
Yeah.
Please.
By the way,
We're begging you.
everyone that tells Daniel Eck,
Daniel Eck.
at Daniel Eck, everyone that begs us for the chapters, we literally can't
Yeah.
do it. We want to.
There's a specific reason too, which is, and I'm sure if you ask them, they'll repeat the reason, which is we have dynamically inserted ads, which are a slightly different length every time.
Yeah.
Which means that it would break
you
chapters.
just do plus or minus.
boo-hoo.
You just
If
do
they're
plus or
dynamically
minus.
inserted chapters up
Yeah,
in here.
dynamically inserted plus or minus.
I'm just
Also, if they're
saying.
dynamically inserted, doesn't that mean they're dynamic and can move if I
Well, I
press the
think
chapter?
podcasts.
I actually don't know that.
Chapters would be like a clickable, a link to like, here's the next section. It starts at this timestamp. Here's the next section.
Yeah.
And every single user has different timestamps.
The way our ads work is we just say, here's the part in the podcast where this gets inserted, and they can change those ads through Megaphone. But like, if you're clicking on a chapter, you should still know it should know how far in the file you are and
I
then
agree
where
with
that
everything
spot
you're
is.
saying.
Okay.
I agree with everything.
Okay.
you're
He
saying.
is just asking questions.
Yeah, I think a ChatGPT and one grad student could figure out how to like, literally just make this work. But here we are. Here we are.
Just say. Just
okay.
to round it out.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that we've talked about it before. Google Podcast got announced it was dying last fall.
Rip.
It is officially dead. There's a great article by David Pierce, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago, called Google Podcast is Gone, and So Is My Faith in Google. I think this article gets written every time Google kills a product, but
Amen.
it especially hit
Wait.
pretty hard this
He
time.
said my faith in Google. He specifically said on that episode he has faith that Google Tasks is going to stay around,
See,
and I'm
faith in
starting to
Google
work.
looks like this.
Yeah.
It looks
you're
like
right.
a sine wave.
Yeah, it's a toxic relationship with Google. So yeah, it's dead. It sucks. If you use Google Podcasts, you now have to use YouTube Music, which is
Or
just
Apple Podcasts.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Use what you want, but regardless, R.I.P.
Use something
I have to say.
multi-platform for your own sake.
Which it was.
Yeah.
Just don't use something multi-platform that's not made by Google.
Pocket
And then-
Casts.
Pocket Cast.
There you go.
Which is now owned by Automatic.
Is that bad?
No, because they own WordPress, Tumblr,
Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola,
The Shineheart Weed
Disney.
Corporation.
yeah,
Okay, none of those are true.
the green M&M.
They closed the hole in the ozone layer.
No, Andrew, no.
We're in too deep.
So what do you guys think Google's going to kill next? What has the least staying power? Or it doesn't make $1 billion?
Don't say it too loud, because it might actually happen.
I hope it's not Tasks. I just started using Tasks, and I'll be very upset. if
I
it's
always
Tasks.
think they're
Narrator.
going to kill it.
It was Tasks.
I don't... Look, they got Keep. You know? They could just integrate... They could just add Tasks features to Keep.
Google never integrates things that you would think they
Makes
do,
sense
but
to
then they
integrate.
just end up killing one of them.
Yeah.
They'll integrate features from one to the other and then kill it.
Yeah, they make a redundant product.
Yeah.
And then they were like, wait, why do we have two of these? They kill one of them and then like integrate like one or two of the features into the old one.
And then they light the building on fire. That's what did all the development of the other one.
And then they fire the employees.
yeah.
As long as they don't cancel or kill the subscribe button.
Agreed.
Did that light up for you?
I would hope YouTube sticks around. I'd like
That'd be
I think
brutal.
it makes $1 billion. So it'll
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So we're safe. So yeah, make sure you subscribe so you can stick around the whole YouTube thing.
Also like and comment.